this pretty mug. It's got a little birdie on the handle. I'm really fond of birdies. Found this one at Bed Bath & Beyond and got 2 of them. So today we're at September 24th, this day in history. On this day in history, we're going to start all the way back in the year 622. Muhammad completes Hijrah. On September 24th, 622, the Prophet Muhammad completed his Hijrah, or flight, from Mecca to Medina to escape persecution. In Medina, Muhammad set about building the followers of his religion, Islam, into an organized community and Arabian power. The Hijrah would later mark the beginning, year 1, of the Muslim calendar. In 1493, Columbus sailed on his second voyage to America. Did you know that he did that? I didn't know that until I started researching today's version of this day in history. Columbus left from Cadiz, Spain, for his second voyage on September 24, 1493, with 17 ships and about 1,200 men. Unlike the low-key first voyage to America, the second voyage was a massive logistic effort. Well, you can imagine with 17 ships. Holy cow. Second voyage brought European livestock, such as horse, sheep, and cattle, as well as settlers to America for the first time. In 1788, after having been dissolved, the French Parliament of Paris reassembles in triumph. In 1789, the Judiciary Act was passed by Congress and signed by President George Washington, establishing a strong federal court system with the powers it would need to ensure the supremacy of the Constitution and federal law. The new Supreme Court would have a Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices as a tribunal made up of 6 justices who were to serve on the court until death or retirement. That day, President Washington nominated John Jay to preside as Chief Justice, and John Rutledge, William Cushing, John Blair, Robert Harrison, and James Wilson to be Associate Justices. A couple days later, on September 26, all 6 appointments were confirmed by the U.S. Senate. In 1852, a new invention, the dirigible, is demonstrated. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus against anyone suspected of being a Southern sympathizer. Now, I've heard that term before, habeas corpus, but I didn't really know exactly what it meant. Corpus, of course, would have something to do with a body. But what is habeas corpus? Well, a writ of habeas corpus is a judicially enforceable order issued by a court of law to a prison official, ordering that a prisoner must be brought to the court so it can be determined whether or not that prisoner has been lawfully imprisoned, and if not, whether he or she should be released from custody. A habeas corpus petition is filed with a court by a person who objects to his own or another's detention or imprisonment. The petition must show that the court ordering the detention or imprisonment made a legal or factual error. The right of habeas corpus is the constitutionally bestowed right of a person to present evidence before a court that he or she has been wrongfully imprisoned. The right of writs of habeas corpus are granted in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which states, "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when, in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it." So, President Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus in an effort to protect public safety and reduce the potential for rebellion. There were many people in Maryland who were sympathetic to the Confederate Army. Maryland was strategically important because of all the overland supply and communication lines that ran through Baltimore. Maryland's loyalties to the federal government were uncertain, so the president ordered the arrest of several members of the Maryland legislature who had Confederate sympathies. In simpler terms, habeas corpus is that thing that, where when you're arrested and you go to jail, well, you get to see a judge pretty quick. That's kind of what that's about. In 1869, there was a Black Friday in the United States. A group of speculators headed by James Fisk and Jay Gould started hoarding gold, which led to high gold prices. The U.S. Treasury, under orders of President Ulysses S. Grant, sold a large amount of gold, leading to a plummet in gold prices within a span of minutes. In 1890, the Mormon Church officially renounced polygamy. On September 24, 1890, faced with the imminent destruction of their church and way of life, Mormon leaders reluctantly issued the Mormon Manifesto, in which they commanded all Latter-day Saints to uphold the anti-polygamy laws of the nation. The Mormon leaders had been given but little choice. If they did not abandon polygamy, they faced federal confiscation of their sacred temples and the revocation of basic civil rights for all Mormons. In 1896, American author F. Scott Fitzgerald was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. And on this item, I discovered that you have to be careful with your research and verify it in several places, because I got some faulty information on this item to begin with that I thought, that doesn't quite sound right. So I checked it out, and the news I'm giving you is correct on this one right now. In 1918, Bulgaria sought a ceasefire with the Allied powers. On September 24, 1918, the government of Bulgaria issued an official statement announcing it had sent a delegation to seek a ceasefire with Allied powers that would end Bulgaria's participation in World War I. In 1929, on this date, the first flight using only instruments was completed by U.S. Army pilot James Doolittle. In 1930, Noel Coward's comedy Private Lives opened in London, starring Gertrude Lawrence and Coward himself. 1936 on this day is the birthday of Jim Henson, the puppeteer who created the Muppets. It says in 1954. Wow, all the way back in 1954. And television's Sesame Street. Jim Henson, American puppeteer, artist, screenwriter, and filmmaker, is best known as the creator of the Muppets. And he was born in Greenville, Mississippi on this date in 1936. He passed away in 1990. On September 24, 1941, the Japanese consul in Hawaii was instructed to divide Pearl Harbor into 5 zones and calculate the number of battleships in each zone, and report the findings back to Japan. On this day in 1941, singer, photographer, activist, and member of the band Wings, Linda Eastman McCartney, was born. She was married to Beatles member Paul McCartney until her death. She was born in New York City on this day in 1941 and passed away in 1998. 1945 is the birthday of Louis Lou Dobbs, TV personality and radio host. Oh, on this day in 1948, the Honda Motor Company was incorporated. Happy birthday, Honda! Motorcycle builder Soichiro Honda incorporated the Honda Motor Company in Hamamatsu, Japan. In the 1960s, the company achieved worldwide fame for its motorcycles. In the 70s, it achieved worldwide fame for its affordable, fuel-efficient cars. Today, in large part because of its continued emphasis on affordability, efficiency, and eco-friendliness, its internal motto is "Blue Skies for Our Children." The company is doing better than most, and on a personal note, yours truly has been driving a Honda since the early 90s. In 1954, The Tonight Show premiered on NBC. In 1956, the first transatlantic telephone cable system began operation. On this date in 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent federal troops into Little Rock, Arkansas, to protect 9 black students entering its newly integrated high school. In 1960, the Enterprise, the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, was launched. In 1962, the University of Mississippi agreed to admit James Meredith as the first black university student, sparking more rioting. On September 24, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson received a Special Commission's report on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which had occurred on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas. In 1969, the Chicago 8 trial opens in Chicago. And there's actually a couple of stories about this. I'll read the names of the participants in a little bit. But one of them was a black activist with the Black Panthers, and he insisted that due to racism that his case should be separated from the others' cases and that he should have a separate trial. And so you've got your Chicago 8 trial to begin with, which then goes to Chicago 7. Chicago 7 is what I remember. That out of the way, we'll get on with the details. The trial for 8 anti-war activists charged with the responsibility for the violent demonstrations at the August 1968 Democratic National Convention opens in Chicago. The defendants included David Dellinger of the National Mobilization Committee, NMC, Rennie Davis and Thomas Hayden of the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, founders of the Youth International Party, Yippies, and Bobby Seale of the Black Panthers, and 2 lesser-known activists, Lee Weiner and John Froines. The group was charged with conspiracy to cross state lines with intent to incite a riot. All but Seale were represented by attorneys William Kunstler and Leonard Weinglass. The trial, presided over by Judge Julius Hoffman, turned into a circus as the defendants and their attorneys used the court as a platform to attack Nixon, the war, racism, and oppression. Their tactics were so disruptive that at one point Judge Hoffman ordered Seale gagged and strapped to his chair. When the trial ended in February of 1970, Hoffman found the defendants and their attorneys guilty of 175 counts of contempt of court and sentenced them to terms between 2 to 4 years. Although declaring the defendants not guilty of conspiracy, the jury found all but Froines and Weiner guilty of intent to riot. The others were each sentenced to 5 years and fined $5,000. However, none served time because a court of appeal overturned the criminal convictions, and eventually most of the contempt charges were dropped as well. In 1970, the Soviet Luna 16 landed, completing the first unmanned round trip to the moon. In 1979, CompuServe offered one of the first online services to consumers. It dominated among internet service providers for consumers through the mid-1990s. 1996, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed by representatives of 71 nations at the UN. Since then, 5 key nations have signed but not ratified, and 3 others have not signed. In 2005, Hurricane Rita, the 4th most intense Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, came ashore in Texas, causing extensive damage there and in Louisiana, which had just been devastated by Hurricane Katrina less than a month earlier. In 2009, the LRAD, Long-Range Acoustic Device, Sonic Cannon, a non-lethal device that utilizes intense sound, was used in the United States for the first time to disperse protesters at the G20 summit in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that's going to wrap it up for today, this day in history, September 24th. As always, links to my research sources are in the description box, along with a postal address in case you want to send me a coffee mug. Thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share this if you found it interesting. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Come on now, you can do it. You can do it. I know you can do it. Good girl. Good girl. Okay, wait a minute. Where's my microphone? Into an organized. That's going to be edited out. Wait until I started doing this research. Drat. Tersenivity Pulafkitty. Oh boy. Read it like it's written. Another good reason to actually proofread these in full before starting. Okay, read it like it's written. I've been infatuated with birdies for as long as I could remember. All right, let's take that one from the top again. Don't make me squeak that pig again.